Fear is the oldest form of currency in human history, and yet it's the one most people never realize they're spending. You don't hand it over in coins or bills. You pay with hesitation, with silence, with the small betrayals of your own instinct. Every time you swallow your truth to avoid conflict, every time you comply just to feel safe, every time you shrink yourself to avoid someone's anger, you've made a transaction. Manipulators understand this perfectly. They know that fear, when cultivated correctly, becomes more profitable than love, more stable than loyalty, and far more addictive than respect. They don't need to threaten you with physical harm. All they need is your imagination doing the work for them. Once fear takes root in your mind, you begin to predict their reactions, preempt their punishments, censor yourself before they ever have to. You become your own jailer, paying them in advance to avoid a pain that may never come. This is how the invisible market operates, not through force, but through emotional taxation. Every fear you hold becomes a unit of value, and those who know how to manipulate it become rich in control. They sell you reassurance. They sell you peace. They sell you permission to breathe. All things that should have been yours for free. And the cruelest part is that you believe you're the one who owes them. You believe their calm is a gift, their approval a reward, their forgiveness a discount on the punishment you've imagined. That belief keeps the market alive, because as long as fear feels valuable, you'll keep paying. You'll keep negotiating your worth in silence, thinking the price of peace is obedience. But fear was never meant to be traded. It was meant to be felt, faced, and released, not invested, not hoarded, not sold. Yet the manipulators thrive because most people would rather spend their courage than confront their terror. They'd rather stay bankrupt in freedom than risk losing the illusion of safety. Every society, every relationship, every hierarchy has its own kind of economy, and fear is the one currency that never loses its value. In the invisible exchanges that happen between people, it's fear that sets the price of power. Those who know how to stir it, shape it, and disguise it can make others pay without ever asking for anything directly. They offer comfort like merchants, but the cost is your autonomy. You trade a little freedom for reassurance, a little honesty for approval, a little self-respect for the illusion of peace. Over time, these trades don't feel like losses. They feel like survival. You convince yourself that this is how things work, that everyone pays something to stay safe. That belief is exactly what keeps you enslaved to the system. Manipulators have learned that you don't need to own people's bodies when you can own their fears. Once they learn what you dread losing, love, acceptance, reputation, belonging, they begin to calculate your worth in the exact moments you doubt your own. They become brokers of your anxiety, adjusting the rates of affection and withdrawal to keep you desperate for stability. You don't see it happening because the transactions are emotional, not visible. You tell yourself you're being reasonable, you're avoiding conflict, you're keeping the peace. In truth, you're paying interest on your own uncertainty. And the more you pay, the poorer you become in spirit. What began as self-preservation turns into quiet servitude. You start to manage your tone, your expressions, your very identity, just to avoid upsetting someone else's balance sheet. And all the while, they grow richer in control. The invisible market expands each time you choose comfort over truth. It thrives on unspoken rules, on invisible debts, on the quiet terror of disapproval. You may think you've escaped it, but as long as your choices are priced by what you fear, you are still part of the trade. The exchange never stops, it only changes hands. There comes a moment when you begin to see the pattern. The way fear circulates like money, passed hand to hand, shaping behavior, buying silence, creating debt. You start to notice how much of your life has been negotiated in this hidden economy. The words you never said, the dreams you abandoned, the boundaries you softened so others wouldn't turn cold. You thought you were keeping peace, but you were paying rent in your own soul. Manipulators thrive on that quiet transaction. They study the exchange rate of your emotions, learning which threats make you flinch and which promises make you yield. Every time you choose comfort over truth, they collect another payment. And what they collect isn't just obedience. It's energy, attention, power. They feed on the subtle shift that happens when your choices stop being free and start being safe. You begin to censor your laughter, your anger, your independence, until your entire existence is measured by what won't provoke them. In that silence, they rise higher, like merchants counting the coins of your caution. But the true cruelty of this hidden market isn't what they take. It's what you stop giving yourself. You lose the courage to speak, to confront, to dream beyond permission. You start to measure every risk through the lens of someone else's comfort. And slowly, your life becomes smaller, safer, emptier. The tragedy is that the market doesn't even need to enslave you forever. It only needs to make you afraid of what happens when you stop paying. The moment you test your freedom, you'll hear the echo of their disapproval in your mind, a voice you once believed was theirs, but is now your own. That is the final transaction, the one where the seller no longer needs to sell. You've bought the fear and started trading it with yourself. And that is how the invisible market sustains itself, through people who no longer realize they are both the buyer and the sold. Safety has always been the most seductive illusion in the world, and manipulators understand that better than anyone. They know that most people will trade almost anything for the feeling of protection, their truth, their boundaries, their self-respect. The cunning ones never demand obedience outright. They simply make you believe that disobedience brings danger. They plant the seed that if you stop complying, something terrible will happen. They will leave, they will rage, they will destroy the fragile peace you depend on. So you adapt. You lower your tone. You walk on eggshells. You learn to predict their moods like a weather pattern. You become a forecaster of emotional storms, preparing yourself for impact long before it arrives. What you don't realize is that this constant vigilance is the very cost they want you to pay. They want you tired, cautious, compliant. They want you to believe that harmony depends on your self-erasure. And when you start equating silence with security, they know they've won. Because then you'll start policing yourself, censoring your truth before it escapes, apologizing for needs that are not wrong, surrendering your power in exchange for a peace that never lasts. The cruel genius of manipulation is that it makes you believe you are protecting yourself when you are, in fact, protecting them. They sell you the illusion of safety while quietly dismantling your sense of control. And soon, what once felt like love begins to feel like containment. You start to realize that your calm isn't freedom, it's submission wrapped in comfort. But by then, you've already learned to flinch at the idea of rebellion. You've learned to see the unknown as a threat and predictability as salvation. And that's when they no longer need to control you, because your fear does it for them. What makes this hidden trade so dangerous is how natural it feels. You don't even realize you've started bargaining until your peace costs more than your pride. The manipulator never asks you to surrender everything at once. They take small payments over time. A pause before you speak, a smile when you don't mean it, a nod of agreement when your instincts scream no. Each tiny compromise feels harmless, even wise. You tell yourself it's just maturity, just keeping the peace, just being understanding. But every time you silence yourself to avoid conflict, you hand over a little more of your freedom. This is how fear becomes profitable, not in sudden moments of domination, but through the quiet erosion of self. The manipulator studies you like a market analyst, learning which fears make you most compliant. The fear of rejection, the fear of disappointment, the fear of being alone. They invest in those fears, using them to shape your choices, to make you believe safety lives in submission. You begin to mistake their control for care. You call your captivity stability. You start to feel guilty for wanting anything that might disturb their comfort. And as your world shrinks around their approval, you find yourself defending the very person who drains you. That's the genius of emotional commerce. It convinces you that what hurts is what protects. You cling to the idea that if you behave just right, if you anticipate every mood, you'll finally earn lasting peace. But peace built on fear is a loan you can never repay. It demands constant maintenance, endless self-correction, eternal vigilance. And the more you pay, the less you remember what it felt like to live without owing anyone your silence. In that endless calculation of risk and response, you forget that real safety isn't given, it's claimed. But manipulators don't want you to remember that, because the moment you do, their entire economy collapses. There is a moment, quiet but devastating, when you begin to understand that the security you've been protecting isn't safety at all, it's dependency. You've been living in a kind of emotional contract, one where your peace is leased and your comfort borrowed. Every calm conversation, every brief smile, every moment without conflict feels like a small refund for the fear you've already paid. The manipulator has no need to demand anything now. They simply wait, knowing you will deliver yourself out of habit. You've learned to anticipate their disappointment, to soften your truth, to preempt any possibility of anger. And each time you do, you reinforce the lie that safety is something they can give you. But safety built on fear is a paradox. It can only exist if you remain afraid. The more you cling to that illusion, the more they tighten their hold, offering protection from the very danger they created. It's like living inside a cage lined with silk, comfortable, familiar, yet still a prison. Over time, you start to realize the real danger isn't what they might do, but what you've stopped doing. You've stopped saying no. You've stopped expressing your doubts. You've stopped living with the raw honesty that once made you human. Fear becomes your moral compass, guiding every decision toward avoidance. And the longer you stay, the more you confuse safety with invisibility. You begin to believe that being unseen is the price of peace. But peace bought with silence is never peace. It's control disguised as care. The truth is, the only real safety lies in reclaiming what was never theirs to sell, your courage to face uncertainty. Once you stop negotiating with fear, once you stop paying for the illusion of calm, the entire structure begins to collapse. You discover that safety was never something to buy. It was something to remember. The power of fear is that it never stays still. Once it stops working, it must evolve. It must grow louder, sharper, more unpredictable to keep you trapped in its cycle. Manipulators understand this principle like economists of emotion. When the old fears lose their sting, they manufacture new ones. They remind you of what could happen if you stop obeying, if you stop caring, if you start thinking for yourself. They don't have to raise their voice or make open threats. Subtle hints and quiet warnings are enough. You're overreacting. You're being ungrateful. You'll regret this. These phrases are not conversations. They're currency injections into the system of fear, designed to keep you paying attention and paying tribute. You start to live in anticipation, rehearsing danger that never arrives, apologizing for crimes you never committed. The manipulator becomes both your tormentor and your savior, the one who frightens you and the only one who can relieve that fear. The more they feed your anxiety, the more they become the source of your relief. That's how they keep their power growing, by ensuring that fear never runs out of supply. Over time, your threshold for threat rises. What once terrified you now feels normal. What once made you panic now feels like part of love, part of loyalty, part of life. This normalization is their masterpiece, because once fear becomes familiar, you no longer resist it. You adapt to it. You begin to budget your emotions around their moods. Calculate your movements like a cautious investor protecting fragile peace. You tell yourself you're being wise, but you're only managing a debt that will never end. The cost keeps climbing, and the only thing devalued is your spirit. You start to forget what calm felt like before fear became your daily exchange. The inflation never stops because its purpose isn't to destroy you. It's to keep you spending yourself until there's nothing left to give. Fear, once planted, must be maintained like a fire, and manipulators know how to keep it burning. At first, they spark small anxieties, gentle reminders that your safety depends on their approval. But soon, those sparks are not enough. They begin to escalate the tension, introducing new risks, new punishments, new consequences if you ever dare to step out of line. This is how emotional control sustains itself, by constantly increasing the perceived danger. What once frightened you becomes normal, so they must invent new levels of fear to keep you obedient. You start to believe the world beyond them is hostile, unpredictable, cruel. You begin to doubt your own strength, your own judgment, your own ability to survive without their guidance. This isn't protection, it's inflation. The price of peace rises with every new threat they create. Each warning, each subtle act of withdrawal, each cold silence adds interest to your emotional debt. You live in a constant state of alertness, waiting for the next consequence, preparing to pay before you're even asked. And this is how the economy of fear thrives, through exhaustion. The more tired you become, the more valuable their approval feels. You start to crave the moments when they're calm, mistaking that calm for safety instead of strategy. The manipulation deepens when fear becomes your normal rhythm, when you can't remember what it felt like to live without tension. The manipulator no longer needs to frighten you directly. The memory of fear does the work for them. You begin to self-correct, to anticipate, to control yourself just to prevent another rise in emotional cost. And by then, they've achieved total dominance, not through force, but through scarcity. They've made fear expensive and peace priceless, ensuring that you will always pay more than you can afford for something that should have been free. Fear only works as long as it feels real, and manipulators are masters at keeping it alive. When the first wave of fear fades, they don't loosen their grip, they adjust the stakes. They begin to whisper new dangers, to plant doubts where calm once lived. Maybe they suggest that others can't be trusted, that the world outside will chew you up, that leaving them means losing everything. These are not statements. They are investments, deposits into the growing economy of fear that they control. Each new anxiety they create devalues your sense of peace, forcing you to spend more and more of your confidence just to feel stable. The result is emotional inflation, where once it took a single word to unsettle you, now it takes silence, distance, disapproval. The manipulator doesn't need to shout. They simply have to withdraw their warmth, and your mind fills in the blanks. You begin to panic before punishment even arrives. You apologize before accusation. You perform safety rituals, over-explaining, over-pleasing, overthinking, to avoid invisible consequences. This cycle becomes so ingrained that fear turns into habit. You start predicting new threats before they're even spoken, trying to stay one step ahead of disaster. But what you don't see is that the goalposts are moving on purpose. The manipulator inflates the fear economy because they know scarcity breeds dependence. The rarer comfort becomes, the more you will chase it, the more you will pay for it. Their control grows not through violence, but through emotional economics, by raising the cost of defiance and lowering the reward of freedom. The tragedy is that the threats are rarely real. They exist only in your imagination, inflated by repetition. And yet, you live by them, shaped by them, spending your courage like currency on a safety that never truly arrives. There comes a point in every toxic dynamic when fear no longer needs to be actively created. It begins to sustain itself through guilt. This is the moment when the manipulator changes the shape of the trade. They no longer demand your compliance. They remind you of everything they've done for you. Every kindness becomes a receipt, every favor a hidden invoice waiting to be collected. You start to feel that you owe them, for their patience, for their forgiveness, for not giving up on you when you made things difficult. What you don't realize is that this is not love, it's accounting. They are balancing emotional ledgers where affection is credit and disobedience is debt. The more you try to repay, the deeper you sink. You apologize for feelings you didn't cause. You overcompensate for mistakes you didn't make. You exhaust yourself trying to even a balance that was designed to stay uneven. That's the trap. The debt can never be cleared because the rules keep changing. You are told that your loyalty proves your worth, that gratitude is the proof of your goodness. And when you try to step back, you feel the weight of invisible interest pressing down on your conscience. Fear shifts its disguise, no longer the terror of punishment, but the terror of being ungrateful, of being selfish, of being cruel. You stay, not because you love them, but because you cannot bear the shame of leaving someone who claims to have given you everything. But this is how they profit. They make you pay with guilt instead of defiance, with exhaustion instead of rebellion. And as long as you keep trying to repay what was never owed, they remain rich in control. The only way out of emotional debt is to recognize the lie, that love was never meant to keep score, and peace was never something you had to purchase. Fear doesn't always look like trembling or tears. Sometimes, it wears the face of obligation. Manipulators evolve their tactics when raw intimidation stops working. They shift from open control to subtle guilt, turning fear into a moral currency. They make you feel that love is something you must constantly earn, that loyalty must be proven, that peace must be purchased with self-sacrifice. This is how emotional debt begins. They remind you of your past mistakes, of the times they forgave you, of how much you owe them for staying, for helping, for tolerating your flaws. Slowly, your life becomes a repayment plan for a debt that doesn't exist. You stop questioning the unfairness because you've been convinced that freedom would make you ungrateful. The manipulator thrives on this illusion of virtue. They no longer need to control you directly. Your guilt does the job for them. You wake up every day trying to pay off invisible dues, terrified that refusing will make you heartless. But what they call love is a transaction, and what you call guilt is just the fear of losing their approval. This trade keeps you small, compliant, and endlessly apologetic. You start measuring your worth in how much you give, how much you endure, how much of yourself you're willing to lose just to keep them satisfied. And yet, no matter how much you pay, the debt grows. Every act of kindness becomes proof of what you owe. Every boundary you set becomes betrayal. That's the quiet cruelty of emotional debt. It convinces you that surrender is morality. You're not loved for who you are, but for how much you're willing to sacrifice. And the longer you stay in that system, the more natural it feels to buy affection with guilt. But love that demands payment is not love. It's enslavement with prettier words. The most effective form of manipulation isn't built on threats. It's built on gratitude. Once fear has done its work, the manipulator changes tactics. They no longer frighten you into obedience. They make you feel guilty for not appreciating their control. Every act of domination is reframed as sacrifice. Every moment of restraint painted as generosity. They convince you that their tolerance, their forgiveness, their patience are favors you could never repay. And so you start to live as if you owe them. You tiptoe through your own emotions, careful not to seem ungrateful, rehearsing gratitude for things that were never gifts. That's how fear changes its shape, from something that terrifies you to something that binds you through duty. The manipulator begins to speak in the language of debt. After everything I've done for you, you wouldn't even be here without me. You know I only want what's best for you. These phrases are chains disguised as care. They make you believe that leaving, speaking up, or even wanting more would make you cruel. And so, you stay, not because you trust them, but because you fear the moral weight of disloyalty. You begin to monitor yourself, punishing your own impulses before they ever have to. You apologize for your exhaustion. You thank them for their silence. You shrink inside your own life while smiling through it all. The irony is that the more you try to repay this emotional debt, the more it grows. Each gesture of compliance only raises the balance. You start to believe that freedom would make you selfish, that your healing would make you unkind. This is how they profit, not by taking your possessions, but by owning your guilt. The transaction is invisible, but its cost is immense. Your peace, your self-worth, your sense of innocence. The truth is, there was never a real debt, only a carefully constructed illusion meant to keep you paying with pieces of yourself. In every system of control, fear is not only the method, it's the profit. Once a manipulator teaches you to fear disappointment, abandonment, or disapproval, they no longer need to force anything. They simply collect the returns. Your hesitation becomes their power, your silence their reward. They invest in your insecurities, knowing each moment of doubt multiplies their influence. The more uncertain you feel, the more you seek their reassurance, and that reassurance is never free. It comes with conditions, with quiet reminders of who holds authority. This is the dividend of fear, the ongoing yield of emotional compliance that keeps them rich in control long after the initial threat has faded. You may think you're acting out of care or loyalty, but what truly moves you is the fear of losing peace, the fear of being wrong, the fear of being unloved. That fear becomes a self-sustaining machine, generating energy for them while draining it from you. They no longer need to intimidate you directly. They simply let the fear echo, watching as you correct yourself before they ever have to. You begin to measure your choices through an invisible filter. What will keep them calm? What will avoid conflict? What will make you feel safe for another day? But each safe decision is another payment, another installment on a debt that never ends. And every time you surrender a little more of yourself, they grow stronger without lifting a finger. That's the brilliance of emotional economics. Control that maintains itself. You think you've made peace, but peace built on fear always serves the one who benefits from your caution. Their victory isn't loud, it's quiet, consistent, and profitable. They collect their dividends not in money, but in your restraint, your hesitation, your shrinking spirit. And as long as you keep fearing the cost of defiance, they'll keep earning from your obedience. The genius of manipulation lies in how it turns emotion into revenue. Once fear has been planted, it begins to yield a steady return. The manipulator doesn't need to shout or threaten anymore. They can simply sit back and collect. Your anxiety becomes interest, your guilt becomes profit, your constant need for their approval becomes an endless source of power. They've learned that real dominance isn't about confrontation, it's about conditioning. The fear they once instilled in you now manages itself, reproducing quietly inside your thoughts. You start to anticipate their moods, adjust your words, and censor your emotions before they ever have to react. This is how they profit, by making you the caretaker of your own cage. The dividend of fear is obedience that requires no effort from the oppressor. You believe you're choosing peace, but you're really preserving their comfort. You've learned that the smallest sign of defiance carries too high a price, so you stay predictable, compliant, contained. Over time, their influence no longer depends on presence. Even their absence controls you. The memory of their disapproval lingers like a warning siren you can't turn off. And the cruelest part is how normal it begins to feel. You call it respect, responsibility, maturity, anything to avoid admitting it's fear. The manipulator has already won when you start policing yourself for them, when you start mistaking submission for stability. Every moment you hesitate, every truth you swallow, every apology you make just to keep things calm, all of it becomes their dividend, the quiet income of control. And while they grow wealthier in power, you grow poorer in courage, until fear itself becomes the economy you live by. The only way to break it is to stop paying, to realize that every act of fear is a small investment in your own captivity, and every act of courage is a withdrawal from their control. Control is never static. It evolves like an economy built on emotion. When someone learns how to weaponize your fear, they no longer need to fight for authority. They simply collect it like interest on a debt you never agreed to. The fear they once forced into you becomes self-sustaining, producing its own momentum, its own harvest. You begin to pay without noticing, through silence, through compliance, through the way you shrink your voice before it even leaves your mouth. Fear becomes the invisible tax you pay for the illusion of peace. The manipulator understands this dynamic perfectly. They no longer demand your submission. They let your own mind enforce it. You start predicting their reactions, avoiding conflict, rationalizing your restraint as wisdom or love. But beneath the calm exterior, you are paying daily installments of your freedom. Every hesitation, every apology that was never owed, every decision shaped by the thought of their anger, it all adds up, accumulating like emotional interest that compounds over time. The manipulator's greatest profit is not your pain, but your predictability. Once they have taught you to associate safety with obedience, they can step back and watch the machinery of fear run itself. You become both the labor and the currency in their psychological market. The longer you keep buying peace with self-betrayal, the more valuable your fear becomes. They don't have to control you directly anymore. Your own caution does the work for them. It's the perfect system of power, one that operates quietly, efficiently, and endlessly, until the day you decide to stop investing in the illusion that fear protects you. Because in truth, the only thing fear ever secures is the profit of the one who taught you to live by it. Every system built on fear depends on your continued belief in its necessity. The manipulator's entire structure of control functions like a shadow market where emotion is traded for stability, where silence is exchanged for survival, and where obedience becomes the counterfeit form of peace. As long as you keep valuing comfort over truth, the system thrives. It doesn't need chains or threats anymore. It only needs your participation. The moment you start questioning the worth of what you're buying, the foundation trembles. When you realize that fear is not protection but payment, and that every act of submission deposits more power into the wrong hands, something begins to shift. The economy of manipulation weakens the instant you stop investing in it. But breaking it is not an act of rebellion in the way most imagine. It is quieter, deeper, and far more dangerous. It means choosing discomfort over certainty, rejection over approval, isolation over false belonging. It means refusing to purchase peace at the cost of your own self-respect. The manipulator will call it betrayal, selfishness, madness, anything to convince you that you're crashing your own life. But that chaos is the sound of the old system collapsing. The inflation of fear loses its value when you stop believing in its currency. The debt you carried was never real. It was a fiction designed to keep you loyal. And once you walk away, you'll see how hollow the threats always were. How the power that held you was never in their hands, but in your willingness to keep paying. True freedom begins when you let the market fall, when you let fear lose its worth. Because the collapse of that false economy isn't your destruction, it's your liberation. And for the first time, you're no longer a product to be bought or a debtor to be owned. You are the silence after the storm, the proof that no one can profit from you anymore. Every manipulative system is sustained not by force, but by faith, your faith that you must keep paying to stay safe. It's a belief quietly instilled and relentlessly reinforced until fear becomes the default language of your existence. You learn to spend your emotional energy on appeasement, to invest your silence like savings, to trade pieces of your identity in the hope of stability. But all along, you are financing your own captivity. The manipulator's genius lies in convincing you that survival requires surrender, that their approval is the currency of peace, and that questioning the exchange will bankrupt your life. To break free is to realize the market was never real, that fear was the illusion that gave it value. You start to see how every demand for reassurance, every subtle threat, every moment you walked on eggshells was part of the same economy, an endless cycle of extraction, where your anxiety was their profit. And the moment you stop participating, the structure begins to crack. The manipulator will rage, bargain, play the victim, anything to restore the transaction, because without your compliance, their wealth of power evaporates. The withdrawal hurts at first. Freedom always feels like loss when you've been taught to equate control with care. But soon, you'll notice the silence that follows isn't emptiness, it's equilibrium. The inflation of threats collapses, and in its ruins, you rediscover your worth. You see that fear was never currency. It was counterfeit, printed by those who needed your belief to stay rich in power. The real economy was always internal, measured not in what you gave away, but in what you reclaimed. When you stop buying safety from those who sell it through intimidation, you don't lose security, you regain sovereignty. That is how the market of manipulation finally dies, not with confrontation, but with starvation. And in that quiet ending, you become unbuyable. Every manipulative system thrives on your fear of collapse, the terror that if you stop complying, everything you've built will fall apart. They make you believe that your obedience is the price of order, that your restraint keeps the world from burning. For so long, you've paid into this illusion like a devoted investor, convinced that fear is a form of wisdom and that submission buys stability. But the truth is far darker. You were never purchasing peace, only renting it under threat. Every nod, every silence, every moment you swallowed your truth to keep the calm was another coin dropped into their pocket. They didn't need to chain you. They only needed you to believe that rebellion would bankrupt your life. And so, you kept funding the system that starved you. Breaking that economy begins with a single realization, that the currency they deal in has no real value unless you keep believing in it. The fear they sell is counterfeit, but the cost you pay is real. Your voice, your confidence, your freedom to choose. The moment you stop treating fear as a form of payment, everything begins to shift. Their control deflates, their threats lose gravity, and their approval, once priceless, becomes irrelevant. It feels like chaos at first, like the collapse of a market that once defined your world. But what's really crumbling is their illusion of power. The structure that thrived on your fear cannot survive your indifference. You begin to see that peace built on intimidation is not peace at all. It's quiet servitude. When you stop trading your authenticity for safety, the economy of manipulation dies a silent death. You don't need to fight it. You only need to stop investing in it. And when the dust settles, you'll find yourself standing in the ruins of their false empire, not broken, but free, holding the only real wealth that ever mattered, the courage to live without paying for permission.